In our last 2 or 3 classes, we've been trying to get an idea of God in both his nirguna and saguna aspects. As we heard, Nirguna Brahman is God as he is in himself, not as how we see him. That is to say, the nirguna or unconditioned aspect is the real nature of God in his higher aspect as the transcendental reality or pure being. No description of this pure being is possible. But at the same time, its existence can in no way be denied. Not only can its existence not be denied, it happens to be the very foundation of relative existence. So, Brahman is the intangible reality that supports, that unifies all the separate objects in this phenomenal universe. If this Brahman didn't exist, this universe couldn't appear. Now, this same Nirguna Brahman is the basis of Saguna Brahman, the personal God, who is said to be immanent in the universe. How does this happen? Without any compulsion from outside, Brahman imposes upon itself, so to say. It takes upon itself a limit, a conditioning called Maya. And it manifests itself as 3 things. The one unconditioned Brahman, taking upon the conditioning of Maya, manifests itself as 3 things: God, soul, and the world. Ishvara, Jiva, and Jagat. Creation, preservation, and destruction are all the activities of Saguna Brahman. Ishvara. It is Saguna Brahman by whom all things have been created, by whom they are sustained, and into whom they are absorbed. When Vedanta speaks of Brahman as the creator, preserver, and destroyer, it refers to Saguna or the conditioned Brahman, not the Nirguna Brahman. Then we heard that this Saguna Brahman or the personal God has 3 main aspects. He is the ruler, the providence, and the savior. First, Saguna Brahman is called Ishvara, the Lord, because he is the almighty Lord of all that exists, the supreme ruler of the entire universe. Wherever there is a manifestation of life, wherever there is a manifestation of power, in whatever form, and whether on earth or in the heavens, it is all derived from Saguna Brahman. But what does it mean to say that Saguna Brahman is the ruler of the universe? What exactly does that mean? First, as cosmic law, he controls the physical and moral aspects of creation. Second, as the ruler of the universe, he guides the activities of all creatures from inside. Firstly, he is the law that controls the physical and moral aspects of creation, and secondly, as the ruler, he guides the activities of all creatures. That is why he is called the Antaryami, the inner ruler. Then, the second main aspect of Saguna Brahman is that of providence, Vidhata. He is the ordainer of everything. A personal God is a necessity in human spiritual development, an important factor in our spiritual life. We can't do without that. An average seeker who is attached to the body, they can't meditate on the impersonal absolute right away. For their benefit, the Upanishads describe Saguna Brahman as the providence, who determines the course of the universe, who guides the life of individuals from within. Under God's supervision, good and evil produce their respective results. It doesn't mean that God is the creator of good and evil. We know the law of karma, the law of cause and effect on the moral plane. It is this that preserves order in the moral world, just as the laws of the state require a judge to administer them. The law of karma also requires an administrator, an intelligent agency that administers this law, and God happens to be the administrator of the law of karma. Third, Saguna Brahman as the savior. According to Vedanta, God's Maya, God's mysterious power, has cast a magic spell upon all living beings. It is this mysterious power that has made us all forget our true divine nature. And once we are caught in that spell, no amount of personal effort on the part of a human being, no amount of personal effort is enough to get out of it and save oneself. Only when by God's grace this Maya is removed, only then can a human being attain liberation. So aspirants seeking spiritual enlightenment, but who are conscious of their many weaknesses, of their limitations, such aspirants feel the need of protection, guidance and grace, and this comes from Saguna Brahman as the savior. All this we heard in our last two classes. God as He is in Himself and as He appears to us. His absolute and transcendental aspect as He is in Himself can only be described as not this, or as Sat Chit Ananda. In His immanent or personal aspect, that is, as Brahman is to us, in that aspect He is the creator, preserver, destroyer. He is the ruler, providence and savior. Now, one question that almost invariably comes up whenever God is described either as Satchit Ananda or as the Lord or ruler, whenever God is described in these terms, the question that comes up is, if this world is the creation of such a perfect, powerful God, why then is it so full of evil and misery? How can a God who is perfect and good in all respects contain within Himself such an imperfect world? Because this world is nothing but He Himself. That is what we heard. Then is He not affected by this? And why does he allow them to exist in the first place? This is a question that has bothered almost everybody. In order to resolve this doubt, we first need to know something about the Vedanta view of creation. Then we'll come back to this question. We've already heard that from the transcendental standpoint, there exists no universe independent of Brahman. Brahman is pure being. From the standpoint of pure being, there is no universe. Because no real change can be imagined in pure being. So the question of creation doesn't even arise. So, staunch Vedantins, they say staunch Advaita Vedantins, there is neither creation nor destruction, neither a struggling nor a bound soul, neither a seeker after liberation nor a liberated one. This is the ultimate truth. When we are under the spell of illusion created by a mirage, to repeat the classic example, when we are under the illusion created by a mirage, we may see water, we may see the reflection of trees. But for somebody who has already experienced the effects of this mirage, for somebody who knows, there is only the desert. The mirage, or the appearance of the mirage, cannot delude him. All the water of the mirage cannot wet one grain of sand in the desert. Of course, to the average person, the universe of names and forms is a fact. And so are pleasure and pain, good and evil, and all the other pairs of opposites. It is all real for people like us. That is why Vedanta does admit the relative reality of the phenomenal universe. It is a wrong notion that Vedanta denies the reality of this world. That it never does. Vedantic cosmology even offers various explanations of the creation. But then the aim of these explanations is not to assert the reality of the creation. The real aim is to indicate the sole reality of Brahman. Their purpose is to show that the phenomenal universe is, the phenomenal universe is merely phenomenal. It is not absolutely or ultimately real. It is relatively real, and this Vedanta does admit. This problem, the problem of the relationship between the unconditioned Brahman and the conditioned or phenomenal universe, this can never be completely solved. Because such a solution is impossible because of the very, very constitution of the human mind. Our intellect functions only in the domain of relativity. Why? Simply because the mind is itself a product of that relativity. Mind is a product of Maya. How the infinite appears as the finite, how the one appears as the many, cannot be grasped by the limited mind. The very limitation of the mind rules out any satisfactory answer to this question. Moreover, a relationship can be imagined only between two existing entities. There can't be a relationship between a thing that exists and with a thing that doesn't. That is not possible. But pure being and the phenomenal universe are not seen to coexist. Pure being and the phenomenal universe don't coexist. When the one is seen, the other disappears. When I see Brahman, I don't see the universe. And when I see the universe, I don't see Brahman. So, because of this, the problem of their relationship baffles human reasoning. It confounds us. So, any statement about the creation has to be understood as figurative. The scriptures do give various descriptions of it, but their purpose is to make the mind understand that there has been no creation at all. That is the final truth. For example, the Upanishads say, just as hair and nail grow on a living person, just as threads come out of a spider, just as sparks fly from a burning fire, as melodies flow out from a musical instrument, or as waves rise on the ocean, in the same way, this universe has also come forth from Brahman. What do these illustrations convey? Through all these illustrations, the idea that is conveyed is that the universe is nothing but Brahman. It is Brahman alone who is present in the creation, not partly, but wholly, completely. This universe is nothing but Brahman itself. So, even though the empirical fact of the phenomenal universe is admitted from our point of view, this world is a fact. You can't deny it. But from the standpoint of Brahman, the act of creation is denied. And it is all because of this inexplicable, mysterious phenomenon called Maya. God is said to project and withdraw the universe without any effort or any outside compulsion. It happens as spontaneously as exhalation and inhalation, breathing out and breathing in. The creation is sometimes described as Leela, the sport of God. God is said to create the universe out of sheer sportive pleasure, just from the very fullness of its nature. The Taittiriya Upanishad says, all living beings are born of bliss, sustained by bliss, and in the end, re-enter into bliss. Born of bliss, sustained by bliss, and merging back in bliss. Which brings us back to our old question. If that is so, if it is true that it is all bliss and nothing but bliss, why then do we suffer? Why is there so much evil? First of all, evil is inherent in the world. There can't be a world without good and evil. And evil is a necessary element. Let me try to explain. What, after all, is evil? If you look at it from the Vedantic point of view, in one short sentence, it could be described as the opposition of the finite to the infinite. That is what evil really is. The infinite is, so to say, imprisoned in the shell of the finite. That is what evil actually is. And anything that strengthens this shell is also evil. The infinite has to break the shell, undergo pain and suffering before it comes into its own. Just as a child learns to walk by repeatedly falling down and crying, we have to achieve perfection by steadily overcoming evil, and that involves much suffering and pain. So we see that evil is essential to our moral and spiritual growth. So from our spiritual point of view, evil may not be all that evil. It is a permanent and necessary factor in any existence that is characterized by growth. If I have to grow, then I'll have to overcome resistance in any form. This has to exist. This evil has to exist as long as there is even a single finite being that is still struggling to regain its infinitude. Another way of describing it is, we may compare it to the shadow that an object casts when it is exposed to light. Just think of ignorance as evil. The shadow vanishes when the object loses its opaqueness, when the object becomes transparent. In the same way, evil, or let us say ignorance, vanishes when the finite becomes infinite. When I purify myself more and more and more, then my heart loses its opaqueness and becomes transparent. So, you may say, but the shadow is unreal. In our example, the shadow is unreal. So, is evil also unreal? That depends. If we are looking at the wrong side of the embroidery, I think I gave you this example 1 or 2 classes ago. If we are looking at the wrong side of the embroidery, from below, there is evil. If we were able to see it from above, we would be seeing it from the right side as God sees it. And then we would find everything neither good nor evil, but just perfect. Evil is real to us, but it has no reality in God's being. As Sri Ramakrishna said, you may ask, how then can one explain misery and sin and unhappiness? The answer is that these apply only to human beings. This is Sri Ramakrishna saying, God is unaffected by them. There is poison in a snake, but though others may die if bitten by it, the snake itself is not affected by the poison. So what is poison to us is something natural to the snake. That is what it means when we say all these things, all these pairs of duality, pairs of opposites, all the duality is inherent in this phenomenal universe, which is nothing but Saguna Brahman himself. Now we will understand why in the Vedantic conception of God there are no moral attributes. In the Vedantic conception of God, there are no moral attributes. No evil, no morality. Where there is no evil, there can be no morality. Morality always involves an antithesis. It is what it is in contrast to its opposite. Moral good is called good only when it is in the process of formation. But when it is fully developed, then what is it? Then it ceases to be good because evil is absent. In the absence of evil, what do you call good? Then it can only be called the perfect. And this is what the word Ananda indicates. Ananda does not mean the Ananda that we have in mind. Ananda is a word that is used to indicate perfection. Anyhow, we have already discussed this idea long ago at the end of our study of Dharma, if you remember, how morality ought to lead to spirituality. Because God realization and not morality. God realization is the goal of human life. Whereas moral life is characterized by struggle, the struggle for perfection. Whereas God realization is the state of perfection which is beyond all struggle. So, it is when I forget God, that I become conscious of suffering and evil. When I forget God, I experience them. Or our life could be compared to a play on the stage. Good and evil, pleasure and pain are all part of this divine play. Saint and sinner, king and beggar, philosopher and idiot, cruelty, kindness, violence, compassion, everything is necessary to enrich the play. I see bad and evil characters on the stage, and they act as if they are going to do harm. But do they really harm anyone? The actors. They don't really hurt anyone. In the same way, what happens in the physical world, which is nothing but God's Leela, what happens in the physical world cannot injure the spirit in me. This is very important to remember. This is the spiritual way of looking at evil and suffering. That is what it means when saints and mystics say it is God alone who appears as saint and sinner, as good and bad. This we should always keep in mind. But what does this idea of play suggest? Does it suggest anything more? To me, it suggests that if it is, after all, a play, and if I happen to be an actor, I need not go on playing my part if I am tired of it. That is what the idea suggests to me. I can quit at any moment if I want to. That is why Vedanta is willing to accept any explanation of creation, ancient or modern. It will accept any explanation of the phenomenal world, provided that explanation shows the ultimate unity of all existence, that God alone has become all this. Good and evil, happiness and sorrow, everything is God Himself. Swami Vivekananda says, in this world, we find that all happiness is followed by misery as its shadow. He says, happiness comes to man wearing a crown of sorrow on her head. They go together because they are not contradictory, they are not two different things, they are different manifestations of the same thing. Life and death, happiness and sorrow, good and evil, they are only different manifestations of one and the same fact. Sometimes appearing as good, sometimes as bad. The same thing produces pleasure and pain at different times. The same thing produces pleasure in one and pain in another. We derive pleasure from eating, but it is pain to the plants and animals that are eaten. So there is nothing that gives pleasure to all alike all the time. Swamiji says that is how it always will be. That is why Vedanta never says that this world is only miserable. That would be untrue. At the same time, it is also a mistake to say that this world is full of happiness and blessing. It's useless to imagine that this world is all good, all flowers, milk and honey. That is how we would like to dream. It is wrong to think also that because one person has suffered more than another, it is all evil. This is also wrong. This duality, this play of good and evil is what makes our world of experience. So Swamiji says the first task of Vedanta is finding the unity behind the diversity. The one being manifesting itself, however different it may appear in manifestation, the one being manifesting itself as the many. Swamiji says that is the remedy, that is the only solution to the problem of good and evil. You can't solve the problem, you can only transcend it. So, this is a world of good and evil. Wherever there is good, evil follows. But behind all these manifestations, behind all these apparent contradictions, Vedanta finds out that unity. It says, give up evil and give up good. Then what remains? Swamiji says, behind good and evil, this only Swamiji could say, behind good and evil stands something which is yours, the real you. It is that pure being which is manifesting itself as good and bad. Swamiji says, know that, know yourself first, and you will be able to conquer everything. Conquer these manifestations, and you will be free to manifest the real you. First be master of yourself. Stand up and be free. Go beyond these laws, because these laws don't absolutely govern you. They're only part of your being. But first find out that you are not the slave of nature. This nature, though it appears infinite and powerful, is still only finite. Swamiji says, however vast this nature appears, it is still a drop in the ocean. And what is this ocean? Swamiji says, your soul is that ocean. Nature is like a mere bubble compared with your infinite being. Know that, and you will conquer both good and evil. Conquer means you will rise above both of them. Then the whole vision will change. Swamiji says, a time will come when you have accomplished this, when you will say how beautiful is good and how wonderful is evil. Swamiji was able to say this. And this is what Vedanta teaches. It doesn't offer any pleasant solution. It doesn't try to cover a dead body with roses, and when the corpse starts rotting, heaping on more roses. That Vedanta doesn't do. This life is hard fact, and we will have to work our way through it courageously. But however hard life may be, Swamiji says, no matter, the soul is stronger. Swamiji says, if you are a Vedantin, don't lay the responsibility on the gods. You are the makers of your own fortunes. You make yourself suffer. You make good and evil. It is you who put your hands before your eyes and say it is dark. Take away your hands and see the light. You are the effulgent, the glorious. You are perfect already. See that one and be free. Swamiji's words. So, that according to Swami Vivekananda, that is the Vedantic solution to the problem of evil. But let us probe the issue a little further, just for the sake of clarification. What is the difficulty in believing that good and evil are two separate entities, two separate categories, and that both of them are ultimately real? Good is real, evil is also equally real. Why not? Swamiji says, this dualistic conception that good and evil are two eternally separate things is absurd on the face of it. Why? Now we come back to our discussion of God. If we give this conception a close look, that good and evil are two eternally separate things. If we give this idea a closer look, we will at once see that this assumption leads to the idea of a finite God. If evil were ultimately real, that means it could never be destroyed. And a God who is powerless against evil, a God who is powerless against evil is no God. Not only that, if evil were something real, something opposed to God and outside of Him, then how could we depend on God for success in our moral struggle, in our spiritual struggle? What guarantee is there that good will ultimately succeed, that we will be liberated? But we do read in the Bhagavad Gita that God does fight against evil, that He does come down as an incarnation when evil becomes excessive. That is true. But here we have to remember the distinction between Brahman and Ishvara. The impersonal absolute and the personal God. It is Ishvara in his second aspect, that of sustainer. It is he who fights against evil, because he is seen as the guardian of Dharma. Who is it that sees him like that? It is we. We see Ishvara as the guardian of Dharma. This world of ours happens to be the theater of struggle, moral struggle, the struggle between good and evil, where Ishvara is always at war with the evil. But who is this fighting Ishvara? In his real nature, he is none other than the impersonal absolute, Nirguna Brahman, seen through our human spectacles. It is this Ishvara that guarantees that good will succeed in the end. And what is evil? We just heard. It is the right way of looking at evil is as the opposition of the finite to the infinite. When that opposition ceases, then the infinite that is here inside returns to its original wholeness. The infinite recovers its original wholeness, and evil just vanishes, disappears. It no longer exists. Now, we need to properly understand what is meant by the opposition of the finite to the infinite. What exactly do we mean by that? If you remember this comparison of evil with ignorance, it becomes clear immediately. What is finite and what is infinite? Matter is finite. Spirit is infinite. In Vedanta, matter is called Anatman. Spirit is Atman. And this world of ours is the battlefield where there is a perpetual struggle between the two. Matter trying to imprison spirit. Matter trying to imprison spirit, and spirit struggling to break out of that prison of matter. Any activity that is going on anywhere in the entire universe, whether we see it or whether it is unseen, it is all nothing but an expression of this struggle, the spirit trying to break free from the limitations of matter. On this earth, we don't know what all is happening in the wide universe. But on this earth, the struggle has so far expressed itself in the form of minerals, plants, animals, humans. From matter to life, from life to consciousness, from consciousness to intelligence, intelligence to intuition. Here we see the progressive conquest of matter by spirit. The victory, not just conquest, it is the victory of Atman over Anatman. In fact, the whole course of evolution consists in only this. spirit struggling to come out of matter, to come back into its own. This struggle is still going on, of course. Evolution is not yet complete. So, if evolution is not yet complete, what would it be when it is complete? That would be the final stage, when all matter has become spirit, when the infinite has come back into itself fully. But will that ever be? That can only be an imaginary ideal. That will never be the fact. It is like as imaginary as the original separation of the absolute reality into matter and spirit. Has it happened? If that has really happened, then you could say that this evolution may come to an end. But if this creation has never happened at all, then how can evolution end? So, from the standpoint of the absolute reality, which is pure being, there has been no creation at all. Because there can be no change in pure being. Pure being, existence in itself, has to be changeless. And so the question of creation doesn't arise. Leave alone the problem of good and evil. So, of course, there can be no talk of evolution and the like from the standpoint of the absolute. But from the standpoint of the relative, will evolution ever be complete? Will there ever be a time when everything here, that is to say, everything on the relative plane of existence, will there ever be a time when everything will be perfect? No. No, because perfection in relative existence is a contradiction in terms. That can never be. Relativity implies imperfection. Relativity means loss of balance, lack of harmony. Only the absolute is perfect. The relative will always be characterized by duality, by multiplicity, by contradiction, struggles, by the pairs of opposites. They are the very nature of relative existence. During Swami Vivekananda's time, there seems to have been a general argument against this Vedantic view that good and evil, happiness and misery are inseparable from one another, that they are two aspects of the same being, the same thing appearing differently at different times. The evolutionists opposed this Vedantic view. Many believed that in the course of evolution, all that is evil was being gradually eliminated. And if this elimination continued for some millions of years, a time will come when all evil will have been removed and the good alone will remain. On the face of it, this is quite logical, apparently a very convincing argument. But Swamiji exclaims, if only it were true, because there is a fallacy in it. The fallacy is the argument of the evolutionists The argument seems to take for granted that both good and evil are fixed quantities. It assumes that there is a definite amount of good and a definite amount of evil, and that this mass of evil is diminishing every day, leaving only good in the end. But is it really so? Our experience tells us that good and evil are both increasing. This is everybody's experience. We have more ways of being happy, but we also become more susceptible, unfailish, more vulnerable to suffering and misery. The greater our enjoyment, the deeper our suffering. So, as Swamiji says, one is the shadow of the other. It may be that evils are being eliminated. Of course, there's no doubt of it. But if that is true, it is equally true that many good things are also dying out. Couldn't we also say that evils are multiplying fast and everything good is vanishing? If good is increasing in arithmetical progression, evil increases in geometrical progression. We could very well put it like that. Whatever. It is this duality, this play of good and evil that makes our world of experience. Without these pairs of opposites, there can be no phenomenal world. And Swamiji says, this is Maya. This is how it always has been. This is how it always will be. Now, what about that earlier statement that good will surely triumph over evil in the end? That God, as the guardian, as the upholder of Dharma, guarantees it, that good will triumph over evil. Krishna famously said, whenever there is a decline of Dharma and a rise of Adharma, I incarnate myself. For the protection of the good, for the destruction of the wicked, and for the establishment of Dharma, I am born in every age. If God has to come down to earth again and again, not just once, if God has to come down to earth again and again to protect the good, it means that evil can never be eliminated entirely. Not even God can do it or will do it, because it is part and parcel of His Leela, this relative existence. It is His divine sport. But then what does it mean, good triumphs over evil in the end? The victory of good over evil is not meant in any ultimate sense, that evil will vanish forever and only good will remain. That cannot be, and we have seen why. So, what it means is goodness will be upheld, wickedness will be punished, dharma will be re-established, balance will be restored for the time being, or for a long time when an incarnation of God comes down. Then what happens? Then the world being what it is, history repeats itself. That is in the very nature of things. And there is no helping it. But that means there is no hope for us. We'll have to keep playing this game. But that's not the end of the story. Evil and misery do come to an end. They do come to an end together with their root cause, ignorance. and they'll come to an end forever. But where? In the lives of individuals. Ignorance, avidya, is said to be beginningless, but it has an end in an individual soul's career. When an individual soul, a jivatma, that is you and me, when an individual soul becomes really tired of playing its part in the play of samsara, then it begins to long to quit the stage, to get out of it all. Dharma and adharma, good and evil, joy and sorrow. It opens itself more and more to God's spiritual influence, becomes more and more receptive to God's grace, devote itself more and more to spiritual disciplines, and finally obtains release from the prison of samsara forever. Samsara, with all its evils, will continue to exist for other bound souls. But for this particular soul, it has finally ended. That is what it means when it is said that good will ultimately triumph over evil in the individual's life. Thank you. That is what I'd planned to tell you today. Thank you very much for attending the class.